Okay, so before we get to the actual proposals, let's define a few needs and wants and the scope of the problem that we're trying to address. So in terms of zero confirmation, ultimately what a merchant is looking for in zero confirmation instant transactions is that they want to give out their goods and services as quickly as possible for a good user experience. I mean, a lot of the core proponents would tell you that you can just wait for one confirmation. What's the big deal? No, the experience sucks. And while doing that, they want to be reasonably sure that they are not giving out their goods and services only to get double spent later. I give out something for free. And in this particular set of proposals, we address cases where the attack is in open. So And I think it will be wise to do a little review on what already works today, because a lot of people say, oh, zero-conf already works fine today. It works fine for a lot of use cases. Let's see where they are. So for one, if your delivery is retractable or not instant, like for example, Amazon only delivers a few hours after your order, then it doesn't matter. It can take zero confirmation, and the countermeasure is just not delivering. And if it's retractable, then it's obvious. And if it's physical, like for example, you are buying a taco, then in most cases, people would not double spend, because the potential for punishment is disproportionate. Imagine you buy a taco, and then you take away the taco, you try to double spend, and then, guess what? In 20 seconds, a block comes in. And then the taco truck owner sees, oh, there's a double spend, and then he chases you down, beats you down, and then sends you to the cops. That is disproportionate punishment. So hence, most people do not try to do that. And also, as Josh pointed out yesterday, like if there's KYC or any kind of places where you are not anonymous and you can be reached out and punished, then most likely double spends will not happen. On top of that, a lot of merchants have their own countermeasures by polling the network, having a really wide web of detection services like BitPay, yours. Those countermeasures are nice and they mitigate further the risk, but they raise the barrier of entrance for merchants and processors. So what we're trying to do here can make their kind of infrastructure not only more robust, but also more commonly available for everybody. And even if your business fits these descriptions, almost all of these use cases are secure because you can perform countermeasures. If instant transactions become even more secure, the risk becomes lower, then your cost at deploying those countermeasures become lower. You know, you can focus on making your taco. You don't have to wash your phone. And lowering the cost and risk of countermeasures can also open up new use cases, just because a lot of times you want to automate some part of your process. You don't want to add the complication of keeping countermeasures in mind, etc. So with all those use cases that are already fairly secure in mind, I start from the principle of first do no harm. So I think that any of the improvements to the protocol or to the common client software policies should first try really hard to not cause any disruption to people who do not care. People who have existing wallets, wallet makers who do not want to upgrade, we should not burden them with anything that says, oh, if you want to upgrade, if you don't want to upgrade, then your experience will be degraded, your security will get worse. We really should try to avoid that. And then on top, we give them benefits. Okay, so with all those in mind, I would like to also address what these proposals do not do, because obviously a lot of people will say, oh, it doesn't do X, so it's worthless. So I would like to cover that first. So first of all the following, like any other zero-conf cases that we use right now, like first seen, that makes all these zero-conf use cases good enough. It's based on a couple of things that we can be reasonably sure about, and we can be reasonably sure about network conditions and regularly assess them. That like first seen is based on the assumption that transactions are propagated really quickly throughout the network, and that almost all miners are, at least right now, are incentivized to increase network value instead of colluding and stealing your money. It does not address cases, obviously, where miners collude secretly to steal your money. That must be addressed by some other measures that are more robust and based on actual incentives and punishment. That is not covered here. It also does not address when two transactions come in, it does not address which transaction is legit. Nodes do not know that, miners do not know that. All they can tell you is that it happened and you should do something about it. An overview of the two parts of the proposal. One part is Doublespend Proof Relay, and one part is the Doublespend Proof Relay, which I propose have the properties that it can be deployed gradually across nodes. It doesn't have to be deployed all at once. It benefits the wallets who adopt it. It doesn't benefit nor harm wallets who are not aware or care about it. And merchants would assess their reduced risk and how they should react based on they can give out goods after a certain period of time, a lack of alert. And the other part, standard priority, is deployed just by miners. It's a mining policy in the mempool, and it immediately benefits existing wallets that doesn't even do anything. So that's the plus part about it. But it's limited in scope in what kind of doublespend can it address. So to start, so I'm going to start with Doublespend Proof Relay. So just to give it a little bit of definition, if two different transactions are broadcasted on the network that spends the same input, they are double spends. So because of the goals that we defined previously, we do not care if they pay the same output address. As long as the two transactions are different, we can tell that an active attempt was made to sign two transactions. People attempted that, and you should know about it. And once a merchant knows about it, then the merchant can decide what to do about it. In the more stringent case, they can refuse service, refuse to deliver the goods. In the less stringent case, maybe they can just tell people, oh, sorry. Thank you. In the less stringent case, maybe they can just tell their customers, you know what? I have some doubts about this. Maybe we should wait for one confirmation, and also you should not try to do this next time. So yeah, the merchants can decide what to do when they get that piece of information. And also a proof that only proves that something happened and you should do something about it is not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary in size, unlike the transactions that they represent. So we can implement it as a default policy and have most of the nodes willing to relay them. And it shall not incur risk by being confused as a transaction, as we will not aid in the propagation of double spend transaction. And it addresses and it addresses the following kind of double spans: fast respan and reverse respan, as Peter pointed out yesterday. And also, if there is a collusion that happen in the public, if a miner really wants to collude, he will probably employ some other channels in secret and would not do this public broadcasting. But if there's a mechanism that happens in the public, it would also be addressed. So a little bit technical in terms of how to generate a doublespend proof. So when we get a Bitcoin Cash transaction, because of the new transaction format that we adopted at fork, we already have the following information: hash of the previous outputs that are spent, hash of the sequences, and hash of the outputs that are spent to, and their corresponding signatures. So we can package this tree, which are irrelevant to whether a transaction is double spent or not, and B are constant in size. We can package this into proofs. You just have two sets of them signed by the same key, and you can point out, oh, they are different and they are signed. Therefore, an attempt was made. I don't care why. And the merchant can refer to the input that is packaged with these two proofs, and then say, oh, these two proofs, by the way, pertains to my input. I should do something about it. So just a few caveats. Since I put forward the proposal, people have pointed out there are some caveats that, for example, some SIG hash types like anyone can pay and none might complicate the process of proof generation, because you can have two different transactions that if you only plug the relevant parts for a given input, they would look exactly the same. Thankfully, they're not that common. So merchants utilizing doublespend proofs should also take care to avoid giving out goods if they have such an uncommon type of transaction coming in. They can do things like, oh, you have something uncommon, maybe we should wait a little bit, and it's not that bad because most people do not use that. And to address something that was pointed out yesterday, in an exchange between Josh and Tom Harding, sometimes as a merchant, you might still want to know a double spend is happening, even if you're not getting the paying transaction itself, and that is a little bit more tricky when you are relaying double spend proofs, because you might not see that double spend proof if you don't get the transaction in the first place. The way to solve that is to make sure you get that transaction. And so that's where protocols like BIP70 comes into place, where you get that transaction first and then ask questions later. So more technical things on how to relay, which will be relevant a little bit later. So when a node receives two transactions that spans the same output but are different, a double spend proof is generated and blasted out. So you got the proof part, and then you got the relevant input package with it. And after you blast it out, the two incoming conflicting transactions would still adhere to the first in rule. The one that comes later would then be kicked out. And then to prevent denial of service, because if you don't do this, people can generate an arbitrarily large number of double spend proofs and just flood the network. Only if you get a proof, only relay if you have a relevant transaction that has that input already in your mempool. And if you got two different double spend proofs, then you only relay the first scene, and it's okay, because as long as there's relevant to the same input, it doesn't matter which one you relay. The goal of the mechanism is to tell people that the key was used to sign the two different transactions, and they conflict. And then, because this is Bitcoin Cash, a lot of people will be interested in relatively trustless SPV wallets. So SPV wallets, if you got a transaction that has a number of inputs, you can receive double-spend proofs from participating nodes and filter for those inputs. That should be how you fetch those proofs from your peers. And just like in normal transactions, to avoid false negatives, it would be a good idea to connect to multiple nodes. And for merchants who accept transactions with unconfirmed parents, that is a use case. Just like in normal cases, that is a use case that should be done with care, because the longer your chain is, the less security you have. And that fact does not change with double-spend proofs. And further complicating the matter is that double-spend proofs also cannot address a range of malleability attacks in the parent chain. But there are certain transactions which, after some effort on the protocol side in Bitcoin Cash, like normal P2PKH transactions, we can be relatively sure that they are not subject to the malleability attack. So if you can trace up the chain and make sure that all of the chain, everything inside the chain are kosher, then you can still take advantage of double-spend proofs and improve your security somehow. And then, just to emphasize the point, again, some people might insist that if it's not 100% reliable all the time, then it's worthless. But the reality is that if more information is better than less information, and if we can get a pretty good level of information to the merchants, then it can act as a deterrent, because it lowers the risk of success for double-spending efforts. So even if it's not 100% reliable, it's still worthy. And as we will see in the following slides, the more it's deployed across the network, and it's quantifiable, I believe, the more reliable it becomes. So one thing that is kind of murky in a lot of protocol upgrades, whether it's consensus protocols or policies across the network or anything else, is the quantification of how exactly do we do it, how exactly do we deploy it across the network, and what happens in the intermediate states when they are not deployed across the network evenly. So I intend to address, and this is especially relevant in Bitcoin Cash, where there are multiple implementations that are present in significant numbers across the network. So I intend to explore that a little by doing some simple simulations. So there's a number of technical details that I would just leave on the slide, but the most important part is that this simulation includes two kinds of nodes. First of all is what I would call the fast relay nodes, which instead of what people would usually imagine, they get a transaction, they forward it immediately. I would just subject them to the fastest rule that I know currently exists on the network, which is BU nodes. They have an internal 50 milliseconds relay cycle, and every relay cycle they broadcast 1/4 of their inventory until it whittles down to 0. Or the other kind of nodes is the one that was inherited from core rules in an effort to increase privacy for originating wallets, which is the 5-second Poisson distributed batch blast. So randomized to a mean of 5 seconds, and then blast out the inventory when it hits that number only. And then it is important to note that this is an idealized network. I did not count anything like network equipment latency, speed of light, and things like that. So what's really important is that you compare between the conditions and see which one is faster, which one is slower, how much a certain given condition affects how fast it is, instead of using absolute numbers, which are for reference but might vary according to actual network conditions. Also, an effort to get a doublespend proof back would fail if you do not get it after 15 seconds. That is in this scenario, and the average time that you get where you get the doublespend proofs is only counting the ones that are successful. Okay, so first I did an attempt on asking the question, what happens if the entire network has fast relay as defined in the previous slide, which is highly desirable but might or might not actually happen even if all the implementations agree. Some nodes might not want to do that, but let's try to see what kind of stuff can we achieve with an idealized version of the network relay policies and speed. So if the entire network do that 50 millisecond 1/4 blast rounds, it is actually pretty awesome. Of course, if you have 100% of the nodes also doing doublespend proof relay and generation, then you can get your proof back really fast across the network. It's a two-way and it bounces back under half a second. And it's pretty robust in that you can have as low as just 1/8 of your nodes. 1/8 of your nodes doing that generation and relay thing, and it's still pretty robust. You still get your proof back really fast, and it doesn't fail, and it only starts to have some failure rate once you get down to 5%, 1% of the network. Even if you're at 5% and 1%, there might be ways to mitigate that. We'll talk about that. So what happens when we introduce slower nodes? So keep in mind that this is all random. We assume that the nodes do not discriminate against each other. They randomly connect to nodes that are on the network. If you introduce this slower relay nodes, then the performance is degraded significantly. If you look at the y-axis, you might notice that I started counting seconds instead of fractions of seconds. So as you can see above, if you have only 25% of the nodes generate and relay proofs, then even a little bit of slower relay nodes, you can see that 10%, 25% here, would impact your performance quite a bit. But that can be mitigated by having a lot more nodes do the doublespend proof and relay. If you have 50%, then you get to a pretty good place. Sometimes you fail, but as mentioned before, that doesn't mean that it's worthless. It's still worth a lot as long as the numbers are low enough. And if you have 75% of the nodes generate and relay proofs, then it might take a while to get. It might take a while within acceptable limits to get to you, but you are still all right.
And you're assuming here that no one's doing the really fast VU method, right?
Oh no. So if you look at the x-axis, 90% on the left is where 90% are slow. On the right are where only 10% are slow and 90% are fast. Okay, so as a final effort at doing the same simulation, I tried to simulate a pretty close mimic to what the network looks like today, which is almost to the 2,000 nodes, and then 60% of them are ABC and 40% of them are BU. And this is what I got. You can go down to 50%. You can go down to 50% deployment, and still not notice any significant failure rate. The amount of time you have to wait for the doublespend proof to bounce back is significant, but not crippling at a few seconds. But once you get down to below 1/3, then things start to get murky. And if you only have 5%, then it's pretty much as good as not working. Yeah, you don't want a thing that fails 80% of the time. Yeah.
What is a failure?
So failure is where the simulation ends if you hit 15 seconds. So if it
doesn't receive a DS proof in 15 seconds.
Yeah, after a DS attempt a fast respend DS attempt was made.
Are you assuming all nodes are only connected to 8 other nodes?
That is in the simulation, and obviously that is almost definitely not the case in the network. So I would like to explore it later when I get hold of more computation time on randomizing and prioritizing some nodes, and that will be a huge parameter space to explore. Perhaps we have some nodes connect to 100 peers, and that would be visibly better, but it will be worse if those nodes do not do double-spend relay, then they will be kind of blocking.
Yeah, I think there's a significant amount of nodes which are connected to thousands.
Yeah. So we know that a partial deployment, if you have less deployment across the network, it hurts the double-spend proof relay. But you can get partial benefits just by having some nodes do it, and the performance is explored as before. And if you have the more nodes that are doing the slow relay, the more you will get hurt too. As pointed out just now, in reality on the network, quite a few nodes might be connected to a lot more peers, and those nodes will be particularly important in affecting this calculation, whether they do double-spend proof relay or not. If they do, it will help a lot. If they don't, it might be negative. So there are a few ways that I can imagine that I might explore later in similar simulations that can mitigate this situation, even if the conditions are not ideal. So perhaps participating nodes can employ measures to adopt default connection, can adopt policies when they are connecting to nodes to prefer each other. So if they prefer each other, and are you relaying fast? Yes. Are you relaying double-spend proofs? Yes. Oh, okay. Then the performance will be significantly faster. And I also think that something that is lacking currently on the Bitcoin Cash is that we do not have regular assessment on network relay conditions. That is independent from the stress test that the community has done a while ago, which I think should be done. So there's a bunch more things that I would like to do later if I get the time and resources and demand to do it. And the other part of the question is, well, we just described double-spend proofs. It benefits wallets who see them. What about wallets who do not upgrade? What about the wallets who just sit there and do nothing? They don't care about this proof. This sounds complicated. I don't want anything to do with it. Can we help them? So just a little bit of description of what happens when you pay a transaction and it enters the mempool today. So most wallets do the first thing. If you pay a fee that is above 1 Satoshi per byte, and it is defined as standard as per current policies, then it generally gets relayed and mined reliably, and that is the zeroconf that everyone knows and loves. On the other hand, if you pay a low fee or non-standard, then relay is flaky, mining is flaky, everything falls apart, and on top of that, I will personally go out on your Twitter feed and tell you that you are the attacker, you are the attack vector, you made everything bad. And the more miners accept their lower fees without coordination in a miner's choice attempt, the more exploitable the reverse respend vulnerability, as described by Peter yesterday, becomes. Most miners are not doing that. What if I tell you that there is a way for miners to adopt a set of policies that can make this first kind of transactions more reliable and allow themselves the freedom to do whatever they want with the second type of transactions? They no longer have to bear the risk of me going to their Twitter feeds and insulting them. And on top of that, this can eventually pave a way to reliably lower transaction fees while keeping everything in one piece. So today, I would like to propose that miners can immediately help existing wallets without the wallets and merchants doing anything, and also help themselves by dividing transactions into two types. One type is what I will call standard priority and non-priority transactions. So SP transactions are exactly what I outlined in the first item just now. Over 1 Satoshi per byte, and is standard everyone loves to use. MP is everything else. And this policy addresses a specific type of exploit, which is reverse respan. So what exactly is the policy? It's actually pretty simple. If you see so normally, miners adhere to the first-in rule. If two conflicting transactions come in, you discard the one that comes later. Now change the rule a little bit. If you see one of them being SP, priority, and the other one being non-priority, then the SP replaces the NP. So by doing that, SP becomes more reliable because you are no longer responsible for any reverse respan attempts. And on the other hand, people would say, well, doesn't that make MP transactions not reliable? Well, guess what? They are already not reliable today. And it's already unusable for zeroconf. Doing this doesn't make them materially less usable because, for zeroconf use cases, they are already not really usable. So if you do that, miners are then free to experiment in that MP space. They can compete, they can race to the bottom, they can do whatever, they can relay like large and weird types of transactions and scripts without having to worry about the effects on the network. They do not increase the risk of reverse respan on the type of zeroconf transactions that everyone knows and loves. And down the line, this would also make it easier to deploy certain rules that encourage certain behaviors, but wallets might not immediately be aware of yet, such as a proposal that I've seen the other day in ABC that encourages the UTXO consolidation, which I think is a really good idea, and the deployment will be smoother this way. Keep in mind that the MP zone would still work exactly the same as long as a miner accepts it, as long as you are good with one confirmation. So yeah, it's just that it's just a very simple illustration of where most of the wallets are and where they would benefit, while everything else can be shoved below a line, and then miners can compete in offering all kinds of to mine all kinds of different transactions. So one thing that people ask is that, well, if we enact such a line, if such a line exists, then and people start to rely on it, then in the future, maybe we want to lower that line, right? What if Bitcoin Cash goes to $100,000 a piece? Then the fees will become high, and you can say, okay, you start using MP transactions, but they are not reliable. Then we might want to lower that line. Well, that is a tough problem. This is not an immediately urgent. Issue, and the line can be drawn without all these measures. But I would love to see that we explore solutions that establish some kind of signaling mechanism that is not necessarily enforced strictly by any kind of consensus or incentives, but rather is just done in a permissionless, decentralized way that provides a point that every wallet and miners can rally to. For example, perhaps in the Coinbase, miners can tell you, well, this is the kind of fee this kind of fee level we would like to draw the line on, and if the median is a certain fee level for the past n blocks, then everyone would rally to that point, and things can proceed smoother. And the worst case is that they lie, in which case it's zero-conf has little protection against malicious miners anyway. And also, I would also like to point out that because of the previous mentioned limitations, this does not address a number of situations where there might be malicious miners, and that will hopefully be addressed by other proposals. And I believe that for any other proposals, because Doublespend Proof has very little drawback, it would be a very nice fallback and complement any such schemes. And finally, I would like to thank a number of people for helping me in putting up this proposal. Chiefly among them, Tom Zander, who helped a lot, especially with the part of proof generation, and Tom Harding, whose proposal I was based on, and also Bitcoin Unlimited for inviting me here. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Thanks very much. Are you not concerned with NP transactions? If you publish an NP transaction and then you use it as an input, and then the second transaction is a standard is an SP transaction. And then you go back and you double spend the NP by using a standard by an SP, and then the child transaction falls away. That's something that we see done with RBF.
Right.
BTC.
So that is a good question. So as with Doublespend proofs, wallets I believe can address. I believe can address this to a certain extent in unconfirmed chains by tracing back and taking a look at the parent transactions to see if they are vulnerable. And I know that this violates the perception that this proposal strictly is strictly beneficial for existing wallets without them doing anything. But I believe that it's probably worth it for the benefit of most common wallets.
Yeah, the minute with the miner policy, if you encourage miners to swap out transactions, I think it increases their attack rate.
Well, I don't think they're going to. The merchant is not going. If you spend from a transaction that is a non-priority transaction, the merchant's not going to detect the spend because he didn't detect the non-priority transaction. Because
I'm saying the non-priority transaction is an input.
Yeah.
And then it's a standard priority transaction.
Yeah, he's not going to detect the.
Right.
He's not going to detect the non-priority.
So if a merchant has a node and the merchant doesn't take non-priority transaction at all in the mempool, then the standard transaction that has that as parent come in, it wouldn't go anywhere, right?
You wouldn't even see it.
Wouldn't see it.
Yeah.
I just had one thing that popped in my head while we were talking about unconfirmed chains. The scenario I gave yesterday where you buy something from a merchant and you're kind of like walking out the door and you're like, oh, I have to buy something else, and you go back and you pay it again. You're spending essentially unconfirmed change at that point, and it's a chain.
That is true.
But in this scenario, the merchant's already accepted the parent, so he could accept the change in that scenario because he's not worried about malleability on the parent. The bigger issue with the unconfirmed chain would be if you walked out of that store and tried going into another one and immediately buying something. But the same place, I think it could work.
Right.
Very good talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my question Suppose I pay a merchant with a 100K TX, which is going to be 200 times slower to validate and propagate than a normal TX. Now, under a minimally invasive proposal, that's a standard TX and needs to be protected. And so whatever time he's going to wait, he's not going to change it. It's waiting 5 seconds or whatever. So I wait 5 seconds. It's a pretty high likelihood that transaction, don't you think it's a pretty high likelihood that transaction will not have reached the miner by the time I wait 6 seconds to transmit a double spend and have the proof go out? And wouldn't that be a reliable way to do a double spend?
So it's okay. So you are saying that if you put out a 100K transaction and it will propagate slowly, and then you put out a fast respend that is 1K that pertains to that transaction, and because it propagates slowly, you will not get the proof in time. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yes.
So that is an interesting scenario which should probably be better addressed by drawing on the board. But I'll just describe it. So because the small transaction that you are propagating to miners, they relay fast. They would reach most of the network. If it takes in a particularly bad scenario, if it takes 6 hops from you to the miner, and the fast respend would have propagated, say, 5 hops, and then your slow respend would propagate 1 hop, and it's slow. But guess what? It doesn't matter, because the fast respend would have collided at a place closer to you, and then you will still get the proof back with less hops.
No, let me clarify though. By the time I send the respend, it's already too late for the miner to detect it, for the merchant to detect it. I wait 6 seconds, and then I send the respend. Isn't it likely that the miner hasn't received the original transaction yet, and that the fast respend will pass it because of the reason you said?
It is possible, and we will probably need to assess it further based on both simulations and also real life scenarios. And perhaps the merchants, if they got such a transaction, they can assess reasonably the time they need to wait by their wallet software. They don't need.
So then they can't protect a 100K transaction then.
Wait, you mean the proof? You mean in terms of proof?
You said
or
the merchants may
replacement?
need to look at the size of the transaction, which means that there's a different class. You can't.
They adjust their delay based on the size
Yeah.
of the transaction.
Yeah, it's not.
Sure.
It's not necessarily a different class. Like if we there are several things that we can find out. We might find out that the network conditions is actually as such that they can reasonably just treat them the same, and no further deal needs to be made. But
Well,
if
it's
we
200 times slower though. Okay. So also, on the topic of minimally invasive, you pointed out the sig hash type variation, which it's not coming to me why, but if a proof can't be used to address that.
So, like for example, if you do a sig hash non, then the hash of the output that you sign are going to be all zeros, right? And so on two different transactions that are double spends of each other, you might get the same message.
I get it. Okay. So then you said, well, it's not that. Thankfully, that's not that common. Well, it could easily be very common for the attacker. I mean, attacker can do every one of his double spends that way.
So the scenario is as such that if your wallet can tell, okay, I got a transaction that is paying me. I want to make sure that it doesn't contain like this kind of.
Okay. So they also need to check the sig hash type. That's another thing they need to look at. They can't just protect every transaction minimally invasive.
Right, and we will need to be careful to specify that if we are to do it, we will need to specify in the specs that wallets should look.
Okay. And then also on the topic of minimally invasive. You mentioned that because of the proof design, this can be changed in the proof, but if the proof doesn't include outputs, then it does have the addressability that on a fast respend, half the nodes wouldn't be able to alert immediately. And you suggested the solution to that is that everyone should use bit 70.
Like you use bit 70 only if you happen to care about getting a proof, even if you are at no risk of being double spent and cheated on goods. If you care about that, then you should probably grab a BIP 70 or similar schemes just to make sure.
Okay. Well, we only have one data point. We asked Josh yesterday if he cared, and he said he did care. So,
yeah,
but he could use BIP 70.
Yeah, if you don't care, then you don't care.
Okay, so I guess to sum up, it would be fair to say that a fair number of other things would need to be done, other than to make it work. Make it work totally reliably against these kinds of attacks.
Reasonably reliably. I mean, none of this. I mean, to be honest, none of this. As I said, none of these measures we can say is 100%
Okay, I'm
reliable.
sorry. I mean to work reasonably reliably.
And and people's definition of reasonable differs. Like, yeah, like maybe some people wouldn't care as much about like sometimes I get 100K transactions. Is it slow or is it fast? Maybe some merchants decide that the risk is okay.
Okay, thanks. And the only other comment is that I think SP replacement, if we were to change the network today to replace non-standard transaction at the miner with a standard transaction, I agree with you. That could be done today, and it would be good. Mm-hmm. It would still leave open the question. It doesn't. It would leave open the question of how to have a reliable solution against fast respends. It may require.
Right. It does not address fast respend at all.
Right, and in order to do everything, it may require something else. But I agree there's no reason to delay that.
Yeah, it plugs a hole. It doesn't plug like other vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much again.